All right, today we are digging into the strange and honestly pretty turbulent history of totemism. And let me tell you, this is one of the most audacious, most controversial theories ever cooked up about how human society even got started.
So let's just jump right in with a question, and it's a big one. What if literally all of human civilization, I'm talking our laws, our morals, our religions, the whole shebang, was built on a single horrific crime? Yeah, it's a shocking idea, right? But that's the absolute heart of a story that Sigmund Freud laid out for us over a century ago.
And to really wrap our heads around it, we've got to go back, way back, to 1913, to Freud's absolutely explosive book, Totem and Taboo. See, he wasn't just analyzing individual people anymore. Oh no. He was basically putting the entire human species on his psychoanalytic couch. Now, Freud's starting point wasn't even his own idea. He actually borrowed it from Charles Darwin. It's this concept called the primal horde. So picture this, a small ancient human group, right? And it's totally dominated by this one single powerful and pretty tyrannical father. He's the big boss, and he jealously keeps all the women for himself, kicking out his own sons as soon as they start getting old enough to be rivals. Okay, so Freud takes this idea and spins it into this gripping four-act drama. So, step one, you got the tyrannical father we just talked about. Step two, the brothers he kicked out are, well, they're not happy. They band together, stewing in resentment, and they form a conspiracy. Then, step three, and this is the absolute crux of it all, they commit the primal crime. They come back, they kill their father, and, in a really shocking twist, they actually eat him. They think that by doing this, they'll absorb his power. But then comes step four, and this is where everything changes. The victory celebration, it doesn't last. It turns to horror. They are just overcome by this profound, crushing guilt. And that guilt, according to Freud, becomes the psychological bedrock for all of civilization. So to make sure a horror like this never happens again, the brothers create two huge foundational taboos. First up, totemism. They basically substitute a sacred animal for the father they murdered. You're forbidden to kill this totem animal, except for one day a year, during a special ritual feast, where the crime is sort of reenacted and remembered by the whole community. And the second one is exogamy. This is huge. The brothers all agree to renounce the very women they started this whole thing for. This creates the incest taboo, and it forces them to find partners from other groups, which in turn creates the very first social alliances. And look, you have to understand, for Freud, this wasn't just a metaphor or a myth. He famously declared, "In the beginning was the deed." I mean, that's a direct shot at the Bible's "in the beginning was the word." He was arguing that a real physical act of murder, not just a thought, not a symbol, is what violently, and I mean violently, kickstarted everything. Human law, religion, morality, all of it. So, as you can probably imagine, this whole theory, dreamed up in Freud's study in Vienna, it landed like an absolute bomb in the world of anthropology. Because at the exact same time, a whole new generation of anthropologists were actually getting out of their armchairs, going into the field. And the societies they were finding, well, they looked nothing like Freud's neat universal story. Okay, so the first big challenge came from an anthropologist named Bronislaw Malinowski. He goes all the way to the Trobriand Islands, and what he finds there completely upends Freud's idea. He finds societies that are organized around the mother's lineage, a mother rights system. Here, the person in charge, the authority figure, isn't the father, it's the maternal uncle. So Freud's whole Oedipus complex, the absolute cornerstone of his theory, it didn't fit at all. Malinowski's big point was this: it's social structures that shape our psychology, not the other way around. And then, fast forward a few decades, and the structuralist Claude Lévi-Strauss comes along and delivers another massive blow. He basically argued that Freud had the whole thing backwards. Totemism, he said, wasn't about guilt over killing a dad. Nope, it was a system of logic, a really clever way of organizing and classifying the world. I love this comparison. For Freud, animals were good to eat, and then to feel super guilty about. But for Lévi-Strauss, animals were good to think with. They were symbols, tools for the mind to create order. So you see, the clash here was just fundamental. They were asking totally different questions. Freud was asking this deep, psychoanalytic why. Why do we have guilt? Why do we have taboos and religion? Meanwhile, the anthropologists were on the ground, focused on the empirical how and what. How are these societies actually put together? What do people really do and believe day to day? And let me tell you, this debate wasn't just some dry academic back and forth. It got personal. It got passionate.
anthropologists didn't just disagree with Freud. A lot of them were completely dismissive, using language that just dripped with contempt.
Take Alfred Kroeber, a really influential American anthropologist. At first, he called Freud's theory an iridescent fantasy. It's such a great phrase, right? Like, it's beautiful, it's shimmering, but it's not real. He said trying to analyze it scientifically was like breaking a butterfly on a wheel. It was just too fragile and fanciful for that kind of heavy-handed treatment. And some people were even harsher. Paul Radin flat out called it a woeful performance. He was just baffled that a mind as brilliant as Freud's could produce what he saw as complete anthropological nonsense. The general feeling was that these psychoanalysts were just being sloppy, that they had no idea how to handle real ethnographic data. I mean, the tension was so thick you could feel it. Get this, in 1924, a psychoanalyst named Ernest Jones tries to give a lecture on this stuff at the Royal Institute of Anthropology, and he's met with vehement protests. The reaction was so hostile that some members actually tried to have his entire lecture wiped from the official record. The clash had become really kind of traumatic for everyone involved. And for years, that really seemed to be the end of the story. Freud's theory was filed away as this beautiful but ultimately failed thought experiment, a dead end. But then, something pretty remarkable happened. Remember Alfred Kroeber, the guy who called it an iridescent fantasy, the butterfly on the wheel guy? Well, almost 20 years later, he comes back to Totem and Taboo, and he issues a formal public apology, an amende honorable. He basically said, okay, look, Freud might have been totally wrong about the historical event, about the actual crime, but he had stumbled upon a profound psychological truth, a deep truth about our complicated, ambivalent feelings toward authority figures, that mix of love, hate, and guilt that we all feel. And that, Kroeber said, is timeless. Okay, so why does any of this 100-year-old academic squabble matter today? Well, because if you start to look at the last century through the lens of Freud's dark little myth, some really disturbing patterns start to pop out. What if, just what if, we're all still living in the shadow of that primal horde? Just take a look at this timeline. It's kind of wild. In 1913, Freud writes about the murder of the father. Just 1 year later, World War I kicks off, what some call the Great Massacres of the 20th century, completely shattering the old patriarchal order of Europe. That's followed by decades of rising individualism and this slow, steady, relentless chipping away at all forms of authority, political, religious, you name it, which leads us right up to today and a really troubling question. Without those shared ideals, those shared authorities, what's left to hold us all together? Freud's framework, whether you buy it or not, gives us a pretty chilling way to look at our modern political world. This idea that maybe society is held together by some kind of shared secret, a common crime. When traditional authority collapses, it just leaves a vacuum, right? And we see this cycle of rebellion, sometimes just for the fun of rebelling. It points to this huge paradox of our time. We deeply, deeply mistrust our leaders, but at the same time, we have this intense longing for strong leadership. And that dynamic, well, that's fertile ground for a new leader of the horde to rise up. I mean, just think about the two great totalitarian disasters of the 20th century, Nazism and Stalinism. It took Europe decades to fully acknowledge and process the sheer horror of what happened. It's almost like the scale of the crime was so traumatic, so huge, that it had to be collectively repressed, kind of like the memory of that first primal murder in Freud's story. You know, our modern world celebrates the rebel, the person who tears down the old system. Our whole culture is basically built on stories about overthrowing the old guard. But Freud's myth makes us ask a really uncomfortable question. What's the end game here? What happens after decades of endless rebellion, when all the old structures are gone and there's nothing left to rebel against? And that really is the final thought I want to leave you with, is Freud's story, and it doesn't matter if it's historical fact or a powerful psychological myth, is it still our story? Are we still stuck in that ancient loop, endlessly repeating the same drama, violently overthrowing the father figure, enjoying a moment of chaotic freedom, only to be overwhelmed by guilt and start a desperate search for a new authority to put in his place? It's a dark thought for sure, but you have to admit, it feels more relevant today than ever before.